The silence of Black Hollow. The train screeched to a stop with a jolt that pulled Sarah Hawthorne from her half-asleep daze. Outside the dusty window, fog pressed against the glass like silent hands trying to claw their way in. This wasn't where she was supposed to stop, but something in her gut, some strange, heavy instinct, told her to get off. The platform was empty. No nameplate, no sound, just the rhythmic hiss of cold wind sweeping across the tracks. She stepped onto the platform with her leather bag slung across her shoulder and the sharp click of her heels the only noise breaking the eerie quiet. She was 29, sharp-minded, and skeptical of anything that couldn't be proven with evidence. As a rising star in investigative journalism, she didn't believe in ghosts or miracles, only facts. But Black Hollow didn't care what she believed. She had been researching forgotten villages for an article on vanishing towns in Britain. Most places had some trace of history, a battle, a plague, a legend. But Black Hollow had nothing. No census data. No church records. No births or deaths registered after 1897. It was as though the village had chosen to erase itself. And yet, locals from nearby areas whispered of it in hushed tones. Children dared each other to walk past the tree line near the old road. Teenagers went missing chasing thrills there. And some came back. Not right. The narrow road to Black Hollow was overgrown with weeds and framed by trees that leaned in too closely, as if whispering secrets to one another. Her boots crunched dead leaves as she walked, the map in her hand flickering in and out of signal on her phone. No GPS. No bars. Just a red dot stuck on a gray void. As she walked, she felt it. The cold. Not the usual winter chill, but a spiritual cold that slipped under the skin and settled around the heart like frost. Her breath fogged in the air, though it wasn't cold enough for that. Somewhere ahead, in the thick white mist, she saw it. The outline of a gate, old and crooked, with iron vines curling around the top. Beyond it stood Black Hollow. The village was smaller than she imagined, about a dozen crooked cottages, their roofs bent like elderly backs under the weight of time. There were no cars, no people, and no sound. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In the center stood a structure that didn't belong in England, or maybe anywhere. It was a mansion of black stone, tall and angular, with sharp points at every corner and windows made entirely of obsidian-like glass. No lights inside. No doors visible from the front. It looked more like a tomb than a home. And yet Sarah felt drawn to it. A strange sign stood by the gate. Not a welcome sign, but something older. The lettering was barely readable, but it said something in Latin. Beneath it, painted crudely in red, were the words, "This is the house of the empty cross. Enter if you've never prayed." She blinked. Had she read that right? Sarah rubbed her eyes. The letters vanished. The sign was blank. She shook off the shiver climbing up her spine and moved toward the mansion. As she approached, the wind picked up, bringing with it the faintest scent, like ash mixed with decayed flowers. The house loomed over her. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt aware. There was no doorbell. No knob. She placed her hand against the stone, and to her shock, the wall gave way like mist. She stumbled forward, falling into darkness. Inside, there were no lights, but she could see. The air glowed faintly, red, like the last light of a dying fire. Walls were carved with symbols, some satanic, others pagan, and a few she couldn't identify. And at the end of a long hallway, she saw them. Figures. Pale, still, watching. They were seated in chairs that faced a grand black fireplace with no fire. Men and women, young and old, all with the same hollow look. Their skin was taut, almost translucent, as if stretched over too little bone. They wore fine clothes, Victorian in style, but their eyes had no life. No reflection. One of them turned slowly, almost with a creak, and looked at her. "You are not like them," he said. His voice was soft but scraped like stone. "You still carry the memory of light." "I'm here for a story," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to know what happened to this village." Another woman stood, her voice dripping with honey and menace. "It is not what happened. It is what we became. We are the unbound." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Unbound? We have freed ourselves from the prisons of faith, of truth, of one path. We accept all and follow none. No heaven, no hell, no God, no guilt. You may stay if you like. You belong here." Her throat tightened. "I don't think I do." The man smiled. "You will. Everyone does. Eventually." She turned to leave, but the hallway behind her had vanished. The room was now endless, with doorways leading nowhere, stairs climbing into ceilings, and reflections in mirrors that didn't match her movements. And then came the whisper. A single, clear voice, male, echoing from beyond. "Say, O disbelievers." Her eyes widened. She spun toward the sound, heart pounding. The room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The unbound screamed, but the whisper kept coming, calm, powerful, unwavering. "I worship not what you worship." A light flickered somewhere far away, pure, white, clean. The man who had spoken to her fell to his knees, clutching his ears. "He's here," he cried. "The one who does not bend." Sarah didn't understand. Not fully. But something in her soul responded. She felt warmth rush through her chest, tears prickling her eyes. She whispered back, not even knowing the full verse, just what came from memory. "To you be your way, and to me mine." The room erupted. Screams turned to wind. The house cracked, groaned, and shattered like glass under sunlight. Shadows fled. The air cleared. And then, silence. Sarah was standing outside again. Black Hollow was gone. No village. No trees. No path. Just a quiet green field under a rising sun. She collapsed to her knees, weeping, not from fear, but from release. From clarity. And as she looked up, she saw a man in white robes, standing in the light of dawn. His face was serene, familiar, impossible. He didn't speak, but she understood. The truth does not need to shout. It only needs to be heard. Sarah didn't remember how long she had wandered through the mist after the house disappeared, or how the dawn bled so quickly into gray daylight that seemed unnatural. She sat on the soft grass, the Quran she didn't remember grabbing clutched in her hand, its pages strangely warm to the touch despite the cold around her. It felt as though the house had never existed, as if Black Hollow itself had never been. The field where it once stood was quiet, with no birds, no insects, not even a breeze. Time felt suspended. The weight of what she had seen, the unbound, their words, the whisper that cracked the air, and the man in light, sat heavy in her chest, deeper than confusion, deeper than fear. It was as if a part of her soul had been called to the surface for the first time in years. She had come here for a story. But now she was the story. And something inside her told her this wasn't over. She rose slowly, brushing dew from her coat and scanning the tree line. Behind her, the forest remained as it had been. Dark, thick, too silent. But ahead, where there had once been crooked rooftops and the sharp corners of that mansion of glass and black stone, there was now only the rolling green field. Except for a path. A narrow, dusty trail that hadn't been there before, winding through the grass like a scar. Without hesitation, Sarah followed it. She had questions. Not just for the sake of journalism, but for herself, for the ache she couldn't name, for the strange calm inside the storm, for the whisper that had spoken with such unshakable peace. Her skepticism, though strong, had been shaken to its roots. After a mile of walking, she found herself before a lone chapel, ancient and broken. Its wooden beams were rotting, its steeple bent like a head bowed in eternal mourning. The door creaked open as she approached, not by her hand, but as if inviting her in. She stepped into the dim interior and was immediately struck by a wave of nausea, not from smell, but from presence. The air was thick and buzzing with something unseen. The walls were lined with defaced religious symbols, crosses turned upside down, stars of David burned out, crescent moons shattered. In the center, a circle had been drawn with salt, surrounding a pedestal of jagged stone upon which sat a journal, old and wrapped in leather. She approached it carefully and opened it, revealing entries from someone who had lived here, someone who had led others. The entries began normally, detailing a man's frustration with religious institutions, his doubts, his anger at wars fought in God's name. But as the pages went on, they grew darker. The handwriting deteriorated. The man wrote of a doctrine that swallows all beliefs, of a power that lives in denying all paths until no path remains. He mentioned a pact, a ritual, an invitation to something called the echoing void. The final entry was a scrawl of blood-red ink, stating simply, "We erased truth and found only madness. The unbound have no eyes because they feared the face of the One. We were wrong. We are trapped." Sarah stepped back, heart pounding. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer. Shadows shifted unnaturally. She turned and saw a mirror at the far end of the room, tall, cracked, its glass smudged but reflecting the chapel clearly. All except for one thing. She wasn't in the reflection. In her place stood the man from the mansion, the one who had spoken of the unbound, his eyes hollow, his smile twisted with something no longer human. He lifted a hand and pointed behind her. She spun around, and the chapel was gone. She was no longer on wooden floors but in a place that defied the senses. A black void stretched in all directions, filled with columns of faint red light, like prison bars in a starless universe. And from the shadows emerged them, the unbound. Dozens. Hundreds. Maybe more. Their faces flickered like candle flames, always shifting, never settled. Their clothes no longer Victorian but modern, old, medieval, tribal, a fusion of every era, every culture, every discarded belief. And they began to speak, not with voices, but with vibrations inside her skull. "You saw the light," they echoed. "You heard the name. You carry the book." Sarah held the Quran close to her chest. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We are what remains when truth is refused and freedom is worshipped above meaning," the voices whispered. "We are everyone who said, 'Your way, my way, no way,' until the roads vanished." "You chose this?" she asked. "No. We denied enough that we became the denial." Suddenly, she felt their presence within her mind. They weren't trying to possess her, but to pull her in, to make her question everything. Her past, her childhood memories of prayer at her grandmother's house, the soft echoes of azan she used to hear near her school in childhood, faint but comforting. They filled her head with noise. Every doubt she'd ever had. Every sin she tried to forget. Every time she told herself, "Faith is for the weak." They threw it at her, twisting it. But then she remembered something else. The man in white, standing calmly while the house fell. The whisper of a verse she didn't fully know, but which had split the mansion like thunder. "That peace," she screamed, not in fear, but in refusal. And she opened the Quran. The void shuddered. The unbound shrieked, recoiling like insects from flame. She read aloud, even without understanding the full Arabic, feeling each word pierce through the darkness. "Say, O disbelievers!" Their faces cracked. "I worship not what you worship." The red columns of light shattered. "Nor will you worship what I worship." The ground beneath her, if it could be called ground, broke like ice over deep water. "To you be your religion, and to me mine." With that, everything exploded into white. Silence returned. The sound of birds chirping echoed faintly. She found herself lying in a small room filled with light, surrounded by nature, as if she had been reborn into a different version of the world. The air smelled of jasmine and honey. She sat up slowly, disoriented but calm. She felt something new inside her. Not just relief, but faith. Not just belief in God, but belief that truth has meaning, and it doesn't need to destroy others to stand strong. A note lay beside her, handwritten on simple parchment. It said, "Truth doesn't hate. It simply doesn't bow." She stood, stepped out into a sunlit meadow, and walked forward, toward her own path. Toward faith. Not because someone forced her. Not because she needed comfort. But because she had seen what no path looked like. And she had chosen. The test of souls. The sun felt too bright as Sarah walked through the meadow, as though she had stepped into a world too clean for someone who had walked among the damned. But the warmth was real, and the earth beneath her feet no longer bent or pulsed like flesh. Birds flew overhead. Leaves rustled in a gentle breeze. For a moment, it seemed over, as if the horror had been a fever dream, a haunting that passed once it had made its point. But peace, she learned quickly, is not a place. It's a test. She made her way back to civilization slowly, a nearby town on the edge of Northumberland offering her the first signs of normalcy. Cars, people, the scent of fresh bread from a bakery, and a train that actually ran on time. But nothing felt quite the same. People moved too quickly, too numbly. Their faces looked distracted, their conversations shallow, like shells without the soul. In the station, as she waited for the next train back to London, she noticed a man watching her. Well-dressed, holding a briefcase, sunglasses on despite the dim afternoon light. Something about his posture made her shiver. When their eyes met, he smiled. It was wide. Too wide. And though the rest of the station was bustling, it felt like time slowed around them. She boarded her train, heart unsettled. As she stared out the window at the grey countryside rushing by, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't escaped. That she'd been marked. The Quran she held in her coat, wrapped carefully in cloth, seemed to hum softly when her fear peaked. She took comfort in its presence, not as a talisman, but as a connection. A rope. Something the dark couldn't twist. That night, back in her London flat, she tried to sleep. But dreams flooded her. Not the grotesque horrors of the mansion, but subtler things. Crowded rooms where everyone wore her face, speaking in her voice, each version of her justifying a different worldview. One said faith was for fools. Another claimed all truths were equal. Another wept without words. And above them all stood the man from the train station, clapping slowly, his smile unbroken, whispering, "The more you know, the less you believe. And when you know everything, you believe nothing." She woke up gasping, soaked in sweat. And then she heard it. The faintest knock at the door. She approached slowly, cautiously, but found no one outside. Just a package. Wrapped in grey cloth. No label. No note. Inside was a book. Black leather, blank cover, but when she opened it, her blood ran cold. The same journal she had read in the chapel. But this one had new pages added. Pages she hadn't seen. Pages describing her. Her arrival. Her resistance. Her reading of Surah Al-Kafirun. The way the mansion collapsed. And then, The final entry. She believes she has escaped. But the echoing void lives not in places, but in people. She will soon see that the world has become the house. Sarah shut the book and dropped it. It landed open on a strange sketch. A city skyline, with shadows crawling over the buildings like vines. The unbound, it seemed, had never been isolated in Black Hollow. They had only been concentrated there. The real infestation was larger, quieter, more cunning. She turned on the news. Headlines scrolled by, riots over religious images, mass spiritual deconstruction forums rising, a new global trend, faith-free living. She stared, heart racing. The house had infected the world, and they were celebrating it. That night, she opened the Quran and read slowly, aloud. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from resolve. Not to exorcise demons, but to remind herself of her position, her clarity, her truth. Say, "O disbelievers." And then she wept, because now she understood. Surah Al-Kafirun wasn't a condemnation. It was a boundary, a moral line drawn not out of hatred, but of peace, of knowing who you are, of letting others go their way without surrendering your own. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself tested at every turn. Her articles were rejected, her public image tarnished. Anonymous hate poured into her inbox. The man from the train began appearing in crowds, always just at the edge of sight. The whispers returned, not just in dreams but in the voices of co-workers, friends, even strangers. Why can't you just be open? Why do you need to cling to something ancient? Don't you think it's arrogant to claim one truth? And every time she answered softly, "To you be your way, and to me mine." But one night, the line was crossed. She returned home to find her apartment door ajar. Inside, the lights were off, and someone had rewritten her walls, literally, with charcoal, blood, and ash. "Erase your line. Join us." In the center of her living room sat the man in the sunglasses. Only now, he was different. No longer hiding. His skin glistened with a wrongness, like oil over something decaying. His smile had grown past human limits. He stood and stepped toward her. "You think your verse protects you?" he asked. "It divides you. It isolates you. It weakens you." She raised her voice. "Say, O disbelievers." He stopped. His face cracked like old porcelain, and behind it burned something hateful and formless. She continued, "I worship not what you worship." The air turned electric. "Nor will you worship what I worship." The shadows recoiled. "To you be your religion, and to me mine." With those words, her Quran burst into light. The man screamed. The apartment trembled. And when the light faded, he was gone. Not dead. Just driven back. For now. In the days that followed, Sarah moved out. Left the city. Traveled. Spoke softly in places of peace. Not preaching but witnessing. Not arguing but affirming. The world was louder than ever, full of false freedoms dressed as truth. But she knew now, truth wasn't loud. It was steady. And the path she walked was her own. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. The light beyond the fog. The cold winds of Scotland brushed across Sarah's face as she stood at the edge of the cliff, where the sea met the sky in a line so infinite it reminded her of something eternal. The storm inside her had finally settled, not because the world had changed, but because she had. Weeks had passed since the last confrontation. The city, with all its noise and neon, now seemed like a distant memory. Out here she could think, pray, heal, She didn't wear her faith loudly. She didn't shout it from rooftops. But it had become her armor, her compass, her still point in a spinning, howling world. She had walked through denial, deception, distortion, and come out seeing. She stayed in a small village far from the city now, where the people were few, the skies were open, and the mosques were small and humble. She spent her mornings in reflection, reading quietly from the Quran, and her evenings writing. Not articles for clicks, but truths for hearts. She had published an anonymous book called The House That Denied, a cautionary tale not only about darkness, but about the seduction of erasing the truth in the name of acceptance. It had gained traction slowly, quietly, finding its way into the hands of those who were searching, those on the edge of something too hollow to name. But peace is never left untouched. One night, the stars blinked out. Not all of them, just one by one, the sky began to dim, as if something was covering the heavens. She stood outside her cottage, wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon darken unnaturally. The winds carried voices again, familiar ones, mocking, questioning, subtle. You still believe? You're just alone. You chose a path with no friends. Don't you see? We are many. You are one. And then she saw them. Dozens of silhouettes emerging from the fog, unbound, faceless, smooth-skinned, whispering from mouths that didn't move. But this time, they didn't come to scare her. They came to offer her something. Their leader, the man with the cracked porcelain face, returned, this time wearing robes that flickered with symbols from every religion in existence. We've changed, he said gently, as if to soothe. We understand now. You can have your truth, as long as you acknowledge ours. Let us in. Let's merge. Let's unify. You say, to you be your religion. Good. Now say, and yours is also true. That is the new peace. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, the wind around her still. Her voice was soft, but firm, like a flame that cannot be snuffed. No. The unbound tilted their heads. We offer peace. You offer compromise, she said. You want to blur the truth until it has no shape. You want everyone to bend so no one stands. He smiled. Isn't that better than division? She shook her head. Division rooted in truth is not hate. It's clarity. I don't force you to follow me, but I will not pretend the path is the same. It's not pride. It's peace. A glow began to rise from the Quran she carried. The unbound snarled. Their leader stepped back. She opened it to the page she now knew by heart. The chapter that had become her sword and her shield. Say, O disbelievers. The wind shifted. I do not worship what you worship. The stars returned, one by one. Nor do you worship what I worship. The fog cracked like breaking glass. And I shall not worship that which you are worshipping. The silhouettes began to burn, not in flames, but in truth. Their forms unraveled like shadows pulled apart by dawn. Nor will you worship what I worship. The leader screamed, not in pain, but in despair. He had lost her, and through her, others. To you be your religion, and to me mine. With those words, the final darkness dissolved. Sarah stood alone again. The sea breathed. The stars shone. And for the first time in years, the silence around her was sacred, not scary. The next morning, the sun rose with a brilliance she hadn't seen in months. Not brighter, but cleaner. The world hadn't changed. There were still battles to fight. Still confusion to resist. Still loneliness in choosing the harder path. But Sarah had won the one battle that mattered most, the one within. She had been tested, pulled, offered glory, comfort, compromise. But she chose truth. And that truth, no matter how quiet, burned with a light that no house of darkness could withstand. Final message. To you be your religion, and to me mine. This verse is not a threat. It is not a rejection of peace. It is the most peaceful rejection of false unity that threatens clarity. It is the line between worship and war, between forced harmony and chosen truth. It is the path of Sarah. It is the path of the unwavering soul.